Not Andrea. Epilogue. It is, of course, tiresome to dwell on sexual abuse. It is also simple-minded. The keys to a woman's life are buried in a context that does not yield its meanings easily to an observer not sensitive to the hidden shadings, the subtle dynamics of a self that is partially obscured, partially lost, yet still self-determining, still agentic, willful, responsible, indeed, even wanton. We are seeking for the analytical tools, rules of discourse that are enhanced rather than diminished by ambiguity. We value nuance. Dogma is anathema to the spirit of inquiry that animates women's biography. The notion that bad things happen is both propagandistic and inadequate. We want to affirm the spiritual dignity and the sexual bonding we seek to find in women's lives. We want a discourse of triumph, if you will pardon me for being rhetorically elegant. I have heard the Grand Inquisitor Dworkin say that, as we are women, such discourse will have to be ambiguous. She is a prime example, of course, of the simple-minded demagogue who promotes the proposition that bad things are bad. This axiom is too reductive to be seriously entertained, except, of course, by the poor, the uneducated, the lunatic fringe that she both exploits and appeals to. It is, for instance, anti-mythological to perceive rape in moralistic terms as a bad experience without transformative dimensions to it. We would then have to ignore or impugn the myth of Persephone, in which her abduction and rape led, in the view of the wise ancient Greeks, to the establishment of the seasons, a mythological tribute, in fact, to the seasonal character of the menarche. It is disparagingly and profoundly anti-intellectual to concentrate on the virtual slave status of women per se in ancient Greek, as if that, in and of itself, rendered their mythological insights into rape suspect. In fact, intercourse, forced or not, is the precondition for a fertile, fruitful, multiplied, as it were, abundance of living things, symbolized by the planting and harvesting seasons. I am, of course, not allying myself either with the right-wing endorsement of motherhood or family in making these essentially keen, neutral, and inescapable observations. We cannot say the Greek philosophers and artists, the storytellers and poets were wrong, or dismiss them simply because some among us want to say that rape is bad or feels bad or has some destructive effects. In fact, it has not been scientifically proven that the effects of rape are worse than the effects of gender-neutral assault. And we are not willing to stew in our stigma. As one distinguished feminist of our own school wrote some years ago about a left-wing journal of socialism, and I am paraphrasing, we should not dwell on rape at all, because to do so negatively valorizes sex. Instead, we should actively concentrate on enjoying sex, so that, in a sense, the good can push out the bad. It is sex negative to continue to stigmatize an act, a process, an experience that sometimes has negative consequences. As if we expand sexual pleasure, we will, in fact, be repudiating rape, in consciousness and in practice. Further, in women's academic circles, we reify this perspective by refusing, for instance, to have cross-cultural or cross-disciplinary discussions with those who continue to see themselves as victims. We deplore racism and endorse the goals of women of color. We do not enter into discussions on the Holocaust with Jews or on slavery with Afro-Americans, because our theory, applied to their experience, might well be misunderstood and cause offense. In fact, we will not affirm the agentic dimensions of their own historical experience, which we agree is essentially an oppressive one. They denounce and declaim, and we support them in those efforts. But, as we find transcending affirmative values in women's experience under patriarchy, so too can we find concrete examples of the same dynamic in both Afro-American and Jewish experience. Ghetto Jews from Eastern Europe did, after all, learn to do physical labor in the concentration camps. These are skills that have value, especially for the essentially alien and working class experience, intellectuals, scholars, and so on. Jewish elitism was transformed into a new physicality, however base and tortured. One can see a foreshadowing of the next Jewish state, the shovels and the picks of the stone quarries transported to the desert. Of course, one must have some analytical objectivity. Afro-Americans sang as a creative response to the suffering of slavery, such that suffering may not be the defining characteristics of the Afro-American experience. The creation of a major and original musical genre, the blues, comes directly out of the slave experience. It is absurd to suggest that slavery had no mitigating or redemptive or agentic dimension to it, that the oppression per se was merely oppressive. These tautologies demonstrate how the dogma of victimization has supplanted the academic endeavor to valorize theory, which, in a sense, does not descend to the rather low level of direct human experience, especially of suffering or pain, which are too subjective and also, frankly, too depressing to consider as simple subjects in themselves, or, frankly, as objects of inquiry. We apply our principles on agency, ambiguity, and nuance exclusively to the experience of women as women. There is no outrage in the Academy when we develop an intellectually nuanced approach to rape, as there would be, of course, if we applied these principles to Jewish or Afro-American experience. It is inappropriate for a white woman to approach those issues in any way, and thus we are insulated from what I can only presume would be an intellectual backlash, while we support the so-called victims in a political atmosphere that Ronald Reagan created that is anathema to us, the cutbacks in civil rights and so on, funding for Afro-American groups and so on. Then, when we mount our fight for abortion, which rests firmly in the affirmative context of a woman's right to choose, we have the support of other groups, and so on. Outside women's studies departments, our theoretical principles are not used, not understood, and not paid attention to, for which we are, in fact, grateful. To be held accountable outside of the sphere of women's studies for the consequences of our theoretical propositions would, of course, be a stark abridgment of the academic license we have worked so hard to create for ourselves. Simple-minded feminists, of course, object to a nuanced approach to rape, but we can only presume that their response to the abduction of Persephone would have been to picket hell. To understand a woman's life requires that we affirm the hidden or obscure dimensions of pleasure, often in pain and choice, often under duress. One must develop an eye for secret signs, the clothes that are more than clothes, or decoration in the contemporary dialogue, for instance, or the rebellion hidden behind apparent conformity. There is no victim. There is perhaps an insufficiency of signs, an obdurate appearance of conformity that simply masks the deeper level on which choice occurs. A real woman cannot be understood in terms either of suffering or constriction, lack of freedom. Her artifice, for instance, may appear to signal fear, as if the hidden dynamic in her is her recognition that she will be punished if she does not conform. But ask her. She uses the words of agency, I want to. Artifice, in fact, is the flag that signals pride in her nation, the nation of women, a chosen nationalism, a chosen role, a chosen femaleness, a chosen relationship to sexuality or sexualities, per se. And the final configuration, the way she appears, is rooted neither in biological givens nor in a social reality of oppression. She freely picks her signs, creating a sexual, political discourse in which she is an active agent of her own meaning. I do not feel, and I speak personally here, that we need dignify or, more to the point, treat respectfully on any level those self-proclaimed rebels who in fact wallow in male domination, pointing it out at every turn, as if we should turn our attention to the very men they despise and, what, do something? Good God, do what? I do not feel that the marginal types that use this overblown rhetoric are entitled to valorization. They are certainly not women in the same sense we are, free-willed women making free choices. If they present themselves as animals in cages, I am prepared to treat them as such. We are not, as they say, middle class, protecting the status quo. It is not, as they maintain, middle class to appreciate the middle way, the normal, the ordinary, while espousing a theoretical radical politics, left-wing and solidly socialist. It is not middle class to engage in intellectual discourse that is not premised on the urgency of destroying Western civilization, though certainly we critique it, nor is it middle class to have a job. It is not repugnance that turns me away from these marginal types, these loud, chanting, marching creatures who do not, and here I jest, footnote their picket signs. These really rather inarticulate creatures who fall off the edge of the civilized world into a chaotic politics of man-hating and recrimination. Indeed, the sick unto death are hard to placate, and I would not condescend to try. Women's biography seeks to rescue from obscurity women who do not belong there in the first place, women of achievement, made invisible by an unjust, androcentric double standard. These are noble women, not in the class sense, because we do valorize the working class, though of course these women are upper class, and not in the moralistic sense, although of course they often are, as pure in the sense of emblematic. But certainly, one need not labor to describe the muck or the person indistinguishable from it. We affirm sexually active women. Yes, we will not explicate either the condition of their lives of sexually we will not explicate either the condition or the lives of sexually annihilated women. They achieved nothing that requires our attention. The crime of rape is not an issue of sex, it is an issue of power. To recast it once again in a revisionist frenzy is an issue of freedom, is painfully and needlessly divisionary. Of course, there is a tradition in existentialist philosophy of seeing rape as an expression of freedom, a phenomenon of freedom incarnate, as it were, for the rapist, of course, presumed male, presumed the normative human. But certainly by now, the psychological resonances of rape for the raped can best be dealt with in a therapeutic forum so that the individual's appreciation of sex will not be distorted or diminished, a frequent consequence of rape that is a real tragedy. The mechanics of the two, rape and intercourse, have an apparent likeness, which is unfortunate and no doubt confusing for those insufficiently sex-positive. One is the other, exaggerated, although of course we do not know, pays St. Augustine, which came first. St. Augustine contends that there was sexual intercourse in the garden, but without lust, which he saw as debilitating once he stopped indulging in it. Of course, we all get older. The philosophical problem is one of will. Is will gendered? Clearly, Nietzsche's comprehension of will never took into account that he could be raped. Sade postulated that a woman has a strong will to be raped and otherwise hurt. It is the governing pornographic conceit, indistinguishable from a will to have sex. The problem of female freedom is the problem of female will. Can a woman have freedom of will if her will exists outside the whole rape system, if she will not be raped or potentially raped, or to cover Sade's odd women, if she will not rape? Assuming that the rapist, qua rapist, imposes his will, can any woman be free abjuring rape, her will repudiating it, or is any such will vestigial, utterly useless on the plane of human reality? Rape is, in that sense, more like housework than it is like intercourse. He wants the house clean. She does not want to clean it. Heterosexual imperatives demand that she bend her will to his. There is, of course, a sociology to housework. Well, there is only one pathology to rape. I am dignifying the opposition here considerably by discussing the question of rape at all. Housework, as I showed above, has more to do with women's daily, ordinary bending of will to suit a man. I object to tying rape to women's equality, either in theory or practice, as if rape defined women's experience or determined women's status. Rape is a momentary abrogation of choice. At its worst, it is like being hit by a car. The politicizing of it creates a false consciousness, one of victimization, and a false complaint, as if rape is a socially sanctioned male behavior on a continuum of socially expressed masculinity. We need to educate men whilst enhancing desire. For most men, rape is a game played with the consent of a knowledgeable, sophisticated partner. As a game, it is singularly effective in amplifying desire. Amplifying desire is a liberatory goal. We are stuck in this epoch with literalists, female wallowers, and the female Jacobins. It is, of course, no surprise to see a schizoid discourse synthesized into a synthetic rhetoric. I, the raped, becomes I, the Jacobin. As the Jacobins wanted to destroy all aristocrats, the feminist Jacobins want to destroy all rapists, which, if one considers the varieties of heterosexual play, might well mean all men. They leave out of their analysis precisely the sexual simulation produced by rape as an idea in the same way they will not acknowledge the arousing and transformative dimensions of prostitution. To their reductive minds, prostitution is exploitation without more, while those of us who thrive on adventure and complexity understand that prostitution is only an apparent oppression that permits some women to be sexually active without bourgeois restraints. Freedom is implicit in prostitution because sex is. Stalinists on this issue, they see the women as degraded because they believe that sex degrades. They will not consider that prostitution is freedom for women in exactly the same way existentialists postulated that rape is a phenomenon of freedom for men, striking out against the authoritarian state by breaking laws and, in opposition to all the imperatives of a repressive society, doing what one wants. They won't admit that a prostitute lives in every woman. They won't admit to the arousal. Instead, they strategically destroy desire by calling up scenarios of childhood sexual abuse, dispossession, poverty, and homelessness. Even the phallic woman of pornography has lost her erection by the end of the list. Rape as idea and prostitution as idea are of inestimable value in sexual communication. We don't need the Jacobins censoring our sexual souls. Meanwhile, in the academy, our influence grows while the Jacobins are on the streets, presumably where they belong if they are sincere. I will keep writing, applying the values of agency, nuance, and ambiguity to the experiences of women, with a special emphasis on rape and prostitution. I have no plans to write about the Holocaust soon, although, I admit, I am increasingly irritated by the simple-minded formulations of Elie Wiesel and his ilk. Kvetch, kvetch. After I get tenure, I will perhaps write an article on the refusal of Holocaust survivors to affirm the value of the Holocaust itself in their own creative lives. Currently, I want to keep those who are dogmatic about rape and other bad things, to keep their moralisms posing as politics off my back and out of my bed. I don't want them in my environment, my little pond. I won't have my students reading them, respectfully no less, or my colleagues inviting them here to speak, to read, to reproduce simplicities, though not many want to. I like tying up my lover, and she likes it too. I will not be made to feel guilty as if I am doing something violative. I was that good girl, that obedient child. Feminism said, let go. You can do what a man does. I like tying her. It's not the same as when a man does it. She and I are equals, the same. There is no moral atrocity or political big deal. I like fantasizing. I like being a top, and I like bringing her to orgasm, although I rarely have one myself. I like the sex magazines, the very ones, of course, that the Jacobins want to censor, except for the fact that these magazines keep printing pictures of the Jacobins as if they are, in fact, Hieronymus Bosch pinups. One does get angrier with them. One does want to hurt them, if only to obliterate them from consciousness, submerge them finally in the deeper recesses of a more muted discourse in which they are neither subjects nor objects. One would exile them to the margins, beyond seeing or sound, but strangely they are sexualized in the common culture as if they are the potent women. Everyone pays attention to them, and I and others like me are ignored, except, of course, when the publishers of the sex magazines asks one or the other of us to write essays denouncing them. But then, of course, one must think about them. I have more in common with the so-called rapist, the man who makes love by orchestrating pain, the subtle so-called rapist, the knowing so-called rapist, the educated so-called rapist, the one who seduces, at least a little, and uses force because it's sexy. It is sexy. I like doing it, and the men I know I like doing it. To a woman. They're pro-gay. I'm an ally, and I will get tenure. I'm their frontline defense. If I can do it, they can do it. We like sex, and to each his own. I'm not simple-minded. Rape, so-called, is her problem, not mine. I'm not the same girl.